to establish that bond, you can only establish bonds with real people. You can't establish a bond with a caricature of a person. So if the leader is not being true to themselves and not leading in their own style, the person that they are working with is never going to build a personal connection. And I think you need that personal connection to break down barriers, to build trust, so that you can have a real conversation. It is so easy to go through the motions of, hi, Juvie, how are you today? How is your family? How are your career goals? Are you progressing well? Tick. Juvie and I just had a work check-in. We didn't get anywhere. It would require us to build trust, a frequency, and a period of time. As we talk more regularly, you get to know me. I display vulnerability by telling you, like, I am tired. You know, my daughter's sick. I'm not at my best today. And then you feel you can share with me, and I respect the trust that you're bestowing in me. And over time, a real relationship builds. And that to me is, I view it like investing in all these little bank accounts of the people that I work with.
My name is Juvie Rivera, and I'm the marketing manager for Factor and also the podcast host for the IT Factor podcast. In today's episode, we have Rob Hartley, and today's topic includes transitioning from active military to life as a civilian, transferable skills between the two, how Rob's 12 years of experience in the Australian Army influences his leadership at Factor, and also a recent client work that had him bridge his experience from his past life in the military and his current life as a tech executive, what the results were for that project and his takeaways, and of course, a lot of friendly banter and some practical advice along the way. So to introduce our guest, his name is Rob Hartley, and he is one of the executives at Factor. He oversees operations and all things related to people. Rob started his career in the military, where he served in the Australian Army for 12 years. Since separating from the military, Rob has worked in the IT sector, cutting his teeth in Canberra-based technology company before spending a few years at Microsoft prior to joining Factor. Across those roles, regardless of company or industry, Rob has come to appreciate that it is working with great teams that brings him the most satisfaction. Rob is also the parent of 4 young children and husband to his amazing wife, Fee. He would like to think he brings this balance to his role at Factor and an understanding that we're all juggling work with the broader priorities of life. So Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Juvie. I've been waiting for my invite. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for mentioning the amazing wife part to keep me out of trouble.
Oh, well, you know, I'm just writing off what you wrote, so you should pat yourself on the back. But yeah, no, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I've recently listened to a podcast that you were on, and learning more about your story, I was like, wow, there's so much here that I feel like our Factor community could really get out of learning more about your time in the military, what it was like to transition into civilian life, and also, yeah, how that informs your time here in Factor. So my first question is, can you tell us about your life before Factor, those 12 years in the Australian Army?
Yeah, of course. Look, so I joined the Army when I was 18, so pretty fresh out of school. I had a gap year after school where I didn't do a whole lot, just, worked and tried to work out what I wanted to do with my life. So I joined when I was 18, went across and did my university and officer training through the Army. So that took me across to Canberra for 4 years, and then I graduated as a young officer, and I kind of did the usual round of postings. So initially I was at Sydney working at a parachute battalion. So yeah, got to jump out of planes and learn my core skills sort of on a gun line. It was there that I did a 14-month exchange with the British Army. So we went across, took a troop of guns and soldiers across, did 7 months of pre-deployment training in the UK, and then deployed to Afghanistan for 7 months with them. Came back, posted up to Townsville for a few years, some different, military training up there and a bunch of cool stuff. Then I took a bit of a segue within the army, and I went to study at the School of Languages and studied as an Indonesian linguist for a year. And then I posted back to Duntroon, the Royal Military College in Canberra, instructed there for 2 and a little bit years. And that was where I sort of decided to finish up my career. I felt it had a nice little poetic, learn a whole bunch across 12 years, come back to that training, pass it on to the next generation of people coming through, hopefully impart some of my lessons on them. And that's where I felt it was a good time for me to step out and try new things and put down some roots with the family.
Yeah, wow. I mean, 12 years, I feel like you summed it up with a nice little bow. Just did a little bit of this, did a little bit of that. But like 12 years in the Army, I'm sure was a hugely transformative time for you. And those skills that you've learned at the front lines were really important for you and still are. So specifically, I want to ask you about like the team-based skills and lessons you've learned and what you've taken away from the military that have transferred to Factor.
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I find it in hindsight, the military's approach to training leadership and management is quite unique because you do specifically train for it from the start of your career. So what I've noticed over the years is that in a lot of other organizations, it's something people are just expected to get better at as they go. You start quite junior, you're not expected to lead or manage anyone. You're around for a while, you maybe get promoted to a senior role or, become a team leader, and you're kind of just expected to pick it up. Or maybe you show a bit of natural flair, natural talent for it. But what I find is depending on the organization, you can get quite senior people within an organization who really have no training or no robust training in how to lead, how to manage, and what to expect. Whereas in the military, I was what is termed a generalist officer. So there are generalists and specialists. So specialists are really good at a specific thing. And in my type of trade, you were called a specialist generalist. You were just being really good at across a broad range of things. And so at the heart of everything you do is leadership and management. So from when I joined at 18, that was 4 years of deliberate training on top of my uni studies. And you just start at the foundations of this is how you lead a section of 8 people. And these are the skills, and this is how you present, and this is how you give orders, and this is how you work in tough conditions. And it's theoretical training in a classroom. You then take it out and you practice it in a field environment. You deliberately pushed out of your comfort zone. All the things you kind of see about the military, like, wow, you're wet and you're cold and you're doing all these crazy things. It's with a purpose of pushing your own barriers and then trying to work out how you lead in those environments. So how do you lead when people are tired and hungry and stressed? How do you do it when you're tired and hungry and stressed? How do you keep you cool? And that you cannot just read a book or listen to a podcast and learn. You have to practice and experience it. And so it starts from when you join that modular building block of cool. Now you've sort of graduated, you've done 6 months learning at how to lead 8 to 10 people. And then we're going to step that up. And how do you do 30 people and 3 lots of 3 moving around? And how does your leadership style change the more remote you get from people?
Yeah.
And so looking back on it, that was an enormous gift from the military. The fact that from the time I graduated as a young officer, you were sort of in command of up to around 30 people. And you are placed, you're trained for that, you're experienced in it. And it is very real. It's not a side effect of what you do. It's not sort of, you have your main job and hopefully you can manage people. That is, success means being good with people, being able to motivate them, being able to do the right things. And I think in that lens, it's got that super real element to it that it genuinely can be life or death. You have to learn that leadership isn't just being popular. It's a balance. It's how do you get close to people? How do you understand people? How do you motivate them? But sometimes you still need to make difficult decisions that are the right thing to do that might put someone's life in jeopardy. And those are all totally transferable to the business world. Hopefully no one's life's ever in jeopardy, but being able to make hard decisions, profit margin versus people's well-being, when is the time to balance the two? So the great lessons that I learned enormously grateful to have had that experience, and something that I look back on very fondly. And I sort of feel that I did enough but left early enough that I loved it. I'd do it all again if I could go back and
Yeah,
talk to 18-year-old me.
that's awesome. So, from what I've heard, one of the best things that the military gave you was just the experience to be a leader in tough conditions. Yeah, where you are leading people when they're tired, when they're upset, when they're homesick, when it is a life or death situation, like very high pressure scenarios where if you know how to rally people even through their darkest times, that is a sign of like a good leader. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I certainly think it's some of those elements. The other thing that I think is really worth calling out is that the opportunity I was given was a chance to fail in a safe environment.
Mhm.
Because you are trained to be a leader. Like, I did not start as a good leader. None of us do. But you go through these processes of being tested, sucking, learning lessons, having great feedback. And I find in the corporate world, it's often that you just get promoted into a role and you're expected to be good. And the
Yeah.
time isn't really there to go, oh, actually, I messed that up. I didn't handle that as well as I could have. So, what the
Mhm.
military afforded me in that training command environment is a chance to learn and practice, which means learning when you're not good, learning your own quirks, learning where all your own pressure points are,
Yeah.
failing an exercise, getting feedback from an instructor whose job is to watch you and say, you did this, or you could improve that, and here's how, try again. So, I
Yeah.
think that's something that we can bring into a corporate world. You can't expect people to just because they're senior
Mm,
or have been around a while, you can't just expect them to suddenly be good at leading people. You got to give
yeah.
feedback. You got to be willing to let them find their own way.
That's a great point. It's an art, right? Like leadership is a art, not a science.
Correct.
And like learning those soft skills, you can be like a senior consultant and be really good at project management, but that doesn't mean you're really good at, leading a team of people and seeing their growth and having tough conversations. So in the corporate world, not like the military world, there isn't that structure for growing leaders the same way.
I think
Yeah.
there's often the same importance put on it.
Hmm.
In that military setting, it is years and years of training, and it is ongoing throughout your entire career. As you progress, you will always go through another level of training about how to step up and do the next thing. I think in our corporate world, it's more about your core skills. You're a great developer and you keep training technically, and you just expected to get better at leading. Or
Yeah.
maybe you do a short little, online course or a workshop, but it's just not given the same emphasis.
Hmm.
And if I go back to what you said earlier about that ability to sort of control your emotions and all those other things, I think that is a really key lesson that I see people get wrong every day, which is if you're in a leadership position, you have to be able to sort of compartmentalize and rise above your own frustration, your own fatigue, your own hunger, and make solid decisions. And for me, that's about having a filter. I can be tired, I can be afraid, but you can't take that out on the team. And too often, I think we see people with a boss or a manager and they go, oh, they're in a mood today, but they're always like this when they're tired. Or
Yeah.
it's really, oh, they've been fighting with their partner at home and they're obviously snappy. We better steer clear of them. In my world, that is not an acceptable outcome for a leader. That you have to be above that. It doesn't mean you're not going to feel those things. And part of being honest and transparent is sharing that with the team sometimes, but you can't make your problem someone else's problem. You can't take it out on the team.
Yeah. Yeah. I I can definitely understand how some leaders take their position for granted, and there's this thing with like ego and like leadership, at times where you get to a position and then you stop having that empathy and that patience. When you have more on your plate, the bandwidth and the patience to deal with other people kind of
No,
shortens.
you said the key word there, empathy. There is a really weird almost sort of assumption amongst some people that empathy and leadership don't go hand in hand. And they go, oh, that person's a good leader. They're strong and they're firm.
Yeah.
Leadership is 100% about empathy. And it's not about being soft. To my mind, being soft would be if you are completely driven by your emotions. Sometimes the right decision to make is going to have a negative impact on someone. For example, it might be the business has to close a business unit and you do have to make people redundant. That is a terrible decision to make, but if it's the right business decision, you might have to do that. You might have to sit someone down and look them in the eye and let them know that they've been made redundant. But that doesn't mean you can't have empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And people seem to think that keeping distant from people and not having empathy somehow makes you a good leader. Whereas I think you have to lean into empathy, you have to lean into warmth, you have to get to know people. Because at the end of the day, leadership is about motivating people to do something that they otherwise wouldn't choose to do.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to understand what makes them tick.
Yeah.
You have to really know them. And for that, you need empathy. You have to get close to people.
Yeah. I think this is a good lead to my next question, which is about having good conversations between managers or commanders and their direct reports. And when it comes to having good conversations, I think we've started to touch on it, like we need to have empathy. But how would you define having a good conversation based on your experience, both in the tech world or in the corporate world and also in the military?
First and foremost, I think a good engagement, a good conversation between people has to be authentic. So your style of having a check-in with someone might be completely different to my style. And that's okay. We all have our own flair. You said it earlier, leadership's an art, not a science. So we all can do it slightly different ways and still get to a good outcome. So there's nothing worse than watching someone try and lead in someone else's style.
Yeah.
Like I am a pretty jovial, lighthearted person. So that's the way my engagements are with people. If someone else tried to joke and banter in that way, it would come across as inauthentic. Just the same as if I sat down and I was very, serious and professional and suit and tie Rob, it just wouldn't come across as authentic. Like
Yeah.
you screw
Yeah.
your nose up, right? Like it doesn't make
That's
sense.
not Rob.
That's not me. So people have
Yeah.
to be true to themselves because I think to establish that bond, you can only establish bonds with real people. You can't establish a bond with a caricature of a person. So if the leader is not being true to themselves and not leading in their own style, the person that they are working with is never going to build a personal connection. And I think you need that personal connection to break down barriers, to build trust, so that you can have a real conversation. It is so easy to go through the motions of, hi, Juvie, how are you today? How is your family? How are your career goals? Are you progressing well? Tick, Juvie and I just had a work check-in.
Yeah.
We didn't get anywhere. It would require us to build trust over frequency and a period of time. As we talk more regularly, you get to know me. I display vulnerability by telling you, like, I am tired. My daughter's sick. I'm not at my best today. And then you feel you can share with me, and I respect the trust that you're bestowing in me. And over time, a real relationship builds. And that to me is, I view it like investing in all these little bank accounts of the people that I work with. When you do nice things or you engage with people when there's nothing in it for you, you're putting deposits into the bank accounts of all these people. And then at some stage, they may need to make a withdrawal, and you've put that trust, you've kind of banked it all, you've built it up over time. And then they go, when they really are having a hard time, or they need to have a real hard discussion, I do think I need a promotion and I'm worried about asking for it, or my life is just going into an absolute puddle at the moment and I need help. But you've got a trusted rapport there that they can kind of leverage on as a lifeline. So I think that's like the core of building those good conversations. Where you need to then take action from it is that it does need to be captured and actionable and followed up on, because otherwise it is just chat. So there's two parts, right? You can just sit and talk to someone, but in a career setting and in a professional setting, people often want something out of that. if they've raised concerns with you, they're going to stop raising them if you don't do anything about them. Sometimes people just want a sounding board, but quite often it's, that's a great point. What are we going to do to progress your career? How
Mhm.
can we identify what skills you need? And can I get you on a course to help improve that? What are we going to do about your next promotion? And how can we get you there in the next 6 months? So part of this client project we did recently was about how do you take the little gems of goodness that are happening and use technology to help sort of surface that up to a higher level where you can start to see across an organization, okay, conversations are happening over here, but they're not happening over here. To try and balance out that need for everyone to have their own flair and leadership style, but you also need some consistency so that people's experiences are similar across an organization.
Right. So I want to touch on the project that you worked on and that you spoke about at the Brisbane user group recently. And the reason why you're the perfect person to be presenting this is because it really touches your past life and bridges your current life, which is, this military style of having a commander and direct reports, structuring conversations and making sure the people that these commanders are in charge of are being checked in on, like mental health wise, career wise, on a regular basis. So, do you have any takeaways from that project? I know that was a pretty long engagement, but the outcome of that was pretty spectacular. I don't know how much we can necessarily divulge, but just, top level, I know that this project was really important to you.
Yeah, I mean, we won't go sort of into any of the client sensitivities, but we can talk easily about the outcomes and the types of things we tried to achieve and maybe even the way that the project was engaged and why it worked so well from my perspective. I think obviously why I'm passionate about it is I am passionate about people. Some of my roles that I've been in were sort of individual contributor roles since I left the military where I didn't have a team. And it was such a strange experience. I found myself in these organizations that were paying me really well and I just felt hollow. And it took me a while and some self-reflection to go, what am I missing? And it was the fact that for the first time since I was 18, I didn't have a team. I didn't have people to check in on. I didn't have people around me. I was an individual contributing, like in a sales role or something like that. And I just realized that that is not me and it's never going to be me. So that sort of really drove home to me that if I'm not working with people, the rest of the business world just doesn't hold the same appeal. To me, it's like people are the ultimate chessboard because we
Mm,
are all, we bring so much to the party. So it takes your full brain to say, but what's happening with this person on this day and how can I get the best out of them and how do they work with this person and are we communicating our goals well enough? Are we getting forward? Take people out of the picture and I am bored. So this project was about facilitating better conversations at all levels of an organization. And most importantly, it was about the lowest levels of the organization. And I don't mean lowest in any disparaging way. I mean furthest from the hierarchy. It was about trying to enable people at a junior level. So you're not talking like CEO of a company to someone, because you're going to get a very filtered conversation there. It's about, junior leaders, team leaders. How do we empower them to have the information at their hands to have a good quality conversation? Because that manifests so many more times across an organization. If you rely on just one or two people at the top checking in, you're limited by time and you're limited by the honesty that you're going to get out of those conversations. If you can empower junior leaders within an organization to know what to say and have good conversations and feel empowered to do it, you can reach a much broader range of people. And then the other thing that's really important for me is mental health and our own well-being and juggling that in the workplace. And so, some of the findings that led to this project were about people not being supported through suicidal ideation or really serious mental health challenges, either because their issues weren't being surfaced or the people dealing with it didn't have the right information and didn't know what to do with it, so it didn't go to the right places. So that there's a technology part there where you can support people and say, if you're seeing these types of things, you don't have to be a qualified psychologist or counsel worker. Frankly, you're not trained to deal with this. Here's how you get help. and
Right.
you can try and connect the people to the right support within an organization. So that was a really cool part of it.
Right.
And then just in the way that the project ran in a post-COVID world, we had some really tight timeframes. We had a client team and our factor team in a shared workspace, actually together every day. It broke down the barriers of the us and them, of consultant versus client. We had a client that knew what they wanted to achieve and were empowered to make decisions. So it was just this awesome environment, to get 10, 15 people together, moving quickly, moving with purpose. It was an awesome mix of banter, watching people develop in real time, great camaraderie with the client because there was a lot of common ground there. So it was honestly to date the most enjoyable project I've worked on.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. And you presented that project to the Brisbane user group recently. Factor's mission is we like to create some social outcomes from our projects. And I think this specific project is a great example of that, how we're taking a common problem, especially one that is a personal experience from you, and then taking technology and trying to bridge the gap. And then going from there, showcasing it to other people and saying, these are problems that you can solve too. So yeah, how is presenting to the user group?
Yeah, it was great. And there were a few parts of it that made it so cool. Firstly, the way it initiated. So from our team, Zalika and Jared, two Brisbane-based team members who are actively involved in that Brisbane user group, were the ones that said, hey, would you be willing to come up and present? And I sort of said, hey, look, if people are willing to listen, I'll talk. So it was just cool. Those user groups are a fantastic grassroots way of getting people engaged. So the fact that it was initiated from our team members who organically in their own time go and meet with other people of similar technical interest, to me, is just fantastic. So I was super grateful for the opportunity and the invite to go up and speak. The second part of it was that it meant I get to go up to Brisbane and spend the day with them before. So just cool to sit down with our team in Brisbane, and we were working on separate client engagements, but we got a WeWork room, so we got to sit together, and that was really nice. And then the actual user group, super engaged audience. This is people that are after hours, sort of 6 p.m. on a weeknight when a lot of people work from home, so have come into the city specifically for it. So I love that passion that people have to learn about the technology stack. And the thing that resonated for me was they were all interested in how the technology could be used to solve a client problem. So luckily for me, they were not after the technical discussion of how was it configured, because I would struggle massively.
Zalika was there. You could have helped me
Zalika
out.
would have got us out of trouble. Their interest was learning more about that client type, not client sensitivities, but in that client environment, how did you go about X? Do you find that the client had an understanding of the technology when it came to Y? And they were all thinking, how could I apply this and these learnings to other clients? So great example, on that project, we had Crystal working as a BA / XUI designer because she's got that amazing sort of graphic design flair. So the Canvas app that we built looked really pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people in the room said, wow, because they were tech first, they were kind of like, we've never had a UI designer on our team, because it's sort of just what it looks like is what it looks like. As long as the functions are there, who cares?
Right.
Whereas for our particular client, they said this has got to look and feel like a modern application. This can't look and feel like it's something straight out of the 90s. So a number of people in the room sort of went, wow, I wonder if we could consider having one of our BAs cross-trained as a UI UX designer and bring that element into their teams. Or we spoke about that, integrated Scrum team and the way we worked with the client, and there are a number of takeaways. So it was an awesome opportunity just to talk them through it. Very informal, relaxed. Sort of ordered pizza and we're sort of eating and chatting. So it was far more of a chat than a formal presentation.
Yeah.
But then people opened up the questions. largely from other consulting companies in Brisbane. But one of the key takeaways from me, again, about Zulika that had helped organise the event, a lady came up to me afterwards, and she had worked previously with Zulika in a previous role several years ago. And she came up afterwards, introduced herself, and she sort of said, "Oh, look, she was working for a health-based client in Brisbane, not a techie." And she just said she wanted a career change. She was looking for something more in her career. And she looked at what Zulika had done with Power Platform and with a low-code application development. And they had worked together. And in her mind now, Zulika was just charging off into this new career. And she said, "I want to do what she's doing." Reached out to Zulika and said, "How are you doing this? What are you doing?" And Zulika had said, "Just start coming along to the user group. Everyone's willing to share their knowledge. You can learn about the technology platform." And then as a result of this lady was upskilling herself on sort of the low code fundamentals and the Microsoft platform, was taking that back to a client, was getting her employer to fund some training for her, trying to find apps that she could get involved in. I thought that's such a cool organic way of this technical skill set manifesting. And a great example from Zulika of leadership at the lowest level of an organization. And it shows that leadership is not about a position. It's an attitude that we can all have regardless of where we sit within a structure.
Yeah. I think you touched on a lot of really good things there, specifically how the user groups is such a democratic way to get into tech, which can be a very intimidating thing. But what we're focused on when it comes to Power Platform and Dynamics and all of these low code solutions is that you don't have to have a degree in coding. You don't need to know Python and C++ and all these like fancy languages. And I think that's the beautiful thing where you can transition from one career to another. And then a lot of the times, because you transition from a career in BA and then to UI UX, you're taking a lot of those skills, and then you're even more valuable because then you can take your experience in one industry and then create business solutions for them in such a flexible, fast, dynamic way. So that's a really exciting thing about Microsoft and the Power Platform. Another thing that you touched on is Zulika and how she has been so proactive about engaging the community, not only like outside, but also inside Factor. She's done a good job of mentoring one of the consultants, instilling in them also a passion for Power Platform. So yeah, I think when it comes to leadership, it doesn't really matter the title. It really just matters about the attitude and that teamwork mentality. If I have information that could benefit you, I want you to benefit from it. And I'll take my time to mentor you or like take you to a user group. We'd love to be able to start or restart a user group out in Canberra, which is a lot of where our work is and where a lot of our people are. Stay tuned, watch this space to all of our listeners for some user groups in the future. So now I want to transition into some more personal questions to round off this interview. Rob, what are you currently working on inside and outside of work?
Inside work, I'm looking at a lot of our internal operations and specifically around our sort of career pathways for our people. So part of the challenge of being a young and rapidly growing company is you get that excitement and chaos of that rapidly expanding bubble, but you also get problems with that, a lack of structure, a lack of clarity. It is a bit of a maelstrom. So now that I've rolled off more client work, a lot of my time is about focusing on how do we build good career pathways for our people? How do we provide people with the clarity that they need of what their role is and what their role isn't? How do we help them identify the next steps? So that's really everything from clarifying our expectations. A lot of the work that we did on that client engagement, we're rolling out internally. So we're rebuilding our own version of that application for our own employee hub. So we have a way of capturing goals, performance-based check-ins with our people, making sure that managers are having those conversations across the organization. So that's something I love doing. And another area that I picked up for this new financial year is around our philanthropic efforts. I don't like CSR, ESG. I just don't like those terms. But, doing good stuff.
Mhm.
We want our company to be more actively involved in society and doing things that make a difference. So we have a number of initiatives that we're looking to champion. We've got some money set aside in the budget for this year. So we're trying to work out how we can do that and maximize our impact even as a small organization. So that's something I'm super happy to get behind. And outside of work, I guess it's kind of still worky, but I have a voluntary role on the board of the Auscham Freedom Project. So that's a charity that is working to prevent exploitation and sexual trafficking of young girls in Cambodia. So that takes a fair bit of my time. And then beyond that, 4 young kids, trying to be a good dad, trying to be a good husband. I spend as much time with them as I can. And that's everything. Just getting out, riding the bikes with them,
Mhm.
the usual dad taxi, getting them to and from sports, reading books with them of an evening. It's just that crazy whirlwind, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, talk about leadership skills being an art, not a science. I feel like that's directly correlated to fatherhood.
Chaos, if nothing else. And if you can manage to motivate kids to move in roughly the right direction, that is a really strong starting point for managing other people in life.
Yeah. I feel like a whole nother conversation would be like, how does fatherhood transition into leadership in the corporate environment? But that could be for a future episode. Any advice you would give yourself from 10 years ago?
Look, I think, yeah, I'm a huge believer that we keep learning and I'll always keep learning. I think the biggest shift for me over the last decade has been about finding balance. So I think that the me of 10 years ago was far more goal oriented, and outwardly I was chasing success probably. I was very motivated. I would have come across as very motivated, very driven. I was willing to sacrifice a lot to get to where I thought I needed to be. But I think deep down, if you scratch a few layers, I was probably expecting work and achievements to bring me more happiness. When I think as I've matured, I've realized that, you kind of have to work out organically what happiness is for you, find that, and the goals and achievements then take care of themselves. So I think now I come from a perspective of it's not just about achieving things or ticking things off a list, because there's just always going to be another thing on the list. It's about being a happier, balanced person. It's about juggling time with family and your career. It is about balance across all things: your health, your fitness, your sleep, your work priorities, when to push, when to give, when to listen to your body and rest, as opposed to the me of 10 years ago who just treated my body like a hire car. You just push, 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 and you take it back with an empty tank. So I think that the advice to me of 10 years ago would be try and find balance.
Balance. That's good. Any advice for anyone transitioning from the military into civilian life?
Look, it's a great question, and it's always topical. I would say just have the belief that you can do it. There is a well-worn path there of people who have successfully transitioned, but there is a sort of attitude out there today, maybe that you're entitled to something or you're owed something because of your military service. I disagree with that completely. Never put yourself in a victim mentality. If you're leaving from the military, reflect on what you've learned, be proud of that. But then the burden sits on you to identify what skills you've got, find people that can help you translate that into other careers. But you have to be realistic and acknowledge that you've got to come and learn a new skill set, because the 10, the 20, or the 30 years that you've been perfecting your career in the military, other people have been perfecting a skill set outside of the military. So you need to be smart about where your skills transfer the best. But then you also have to roll up your sleeves and go, you're going to have to learn a new industry, or you're going to have to learn a new technical skill set. The second you think that you're owed something or things should just be given to you, it's a fast road to nowhere.
Yeah. Would you say that anyone who's interested in kind of going down your route, a good and easy way to start would be joining a user group, a local user group, seeing what it's about, starting those conversations, starting those networks?
Yeah, look, it probably does depend on what people are looking for. For me personally, starting on the tools and starting building applications wouldn't have been the right path for me. I'm not geared that way. I found my way into sort of operations management because I just found I had a good skill set for solving random problems and sort of bringing some systems and organization to things. But I would say just reach out. If anyone's listened to this and wants to reach out to me and have a chat, more than happy to, because I think it's about finding what's right for them, because there are certainly facilities and groups available for whatever their preference is.
I think we have had a lot of really golden nuggets of truth, and I hope people on the other end have gotten a lot out of this podcast episode. And yeah, any last words for the people? Anything you want to shout out?
No, thank you for organising and thank you for hosting this. It's a great effort. It's a great, again, initiative that you've been driving, and I'm really, really happy to have the chance to have a chat.
Woohoo! Hopefully one day you'll be on the host seat. I feel like you'd be really fun to be the one giving the questions.
We might have to flip this around for an episode and get the life of Juvie.
Oh boy, I think I'll have to be absent for that day. Yeah.
Cheers, Juvie.
Well, thank you so much, Rob, and catch you next time on our next episode of the It Factor podcast.